The Canon EOS R5 was introduced by Canon somewhere in summer 2020, and I was one of the first who got this camera in my hands in the third quarter of 2020, and I actually did a lot of shootings with it, but I never posted a review about it. And I think that's a shame, because I want to share with you why this camera immediately caught my attention, and I will in this video provide 5 reasons why I think the Canon EOS R5 will be one of the top-notch cameras in 2021 and clearly also beyond. And now let's kick off the video. Despite the fact that I so far did not pay a lot of attention on my channel to Canon gear, I nevertheless was in touch with Canon for many years. And I remember that about 10 years ago, I had a quite affordable APS-C crop camera from Canon. I think it was the 650D. I also over the years did shootings with the Canon EOS 5D Mark IV, for instance, and its predecessors. So I always kind of liked Canon, but it was never my mainstream gear. And when some time ago the Canon EOS R hit the market, which is this camera here, I tried if I find back into the Canon universe with, let's say, more intensity than just sometimes having it, shooting it, or borrowing it and shooting it, whatever it is. And what then fascinated me sometime later when the Canon EOS R hit the market, and I used this camera from time to time for astro shootings, is the Canon EOS RA. And that's a specially modified sensor here, which is suitable for astrophotography and creates beautiful images of the night sky. But now the Canon EOS R5, in my opinion, is a real game changer. And in this video, with my 5 reasons, I will try to make my point and explain to you why this brings Canon back to the top of camera manufacturers. Clearly, in this video, I will not be able to cover all the specs, features, and capabilities of the EOS R5. There are just too many of them. I should say the EOS R5 is one of the most feature-packed cameras in 2021. And I will also call it a hybrid camera, and I come back to that point under another reason. My first reason I want to provide is the concept of the camera, the build quality and the handling. And one reason why the Canon EOS R never made it more frequently into my shootings is because it has only one SD card slot. And that's not good enough for me. And most cameras today have 2 SD card slots or a compact flash express and an SD card slot. And clearly you could connect this to your computer, laptop, iPad, what have you. And then in this way create during the shooting already backups to make sure if you have a physical accident on that SD card, you don't lose all your footage, which is bad. If you're on a professional shooting and you rely on good footage, you cannot afford your SD card to break down and then have only one in the slot and not a backup, let's say, of each image transferred via Wi-Fi to your iPad or your computer. That changed with the R5. So the R5 has 2 card slots, a compact flash express card slot and an SD card slot. And I say it right up front, you need to have very fast cards with high transfer rates, otherwise you will not be able to leverage this camera. But 2 cards is good. You can configure them in the menu, and in this way make sure that you have basically always a backup on your second card. And that is something I personally demand for my shootings. Another point under concept and handling is that this camera is fully weather sealed and indeed is very robust. In particular, the RF lenses appear to me much more robust than what we had in the EF lens lineup from Canon. And you can shoot with this camera under very bad weather conditions. Clearly that's not a distinction attribute to other cameras. Most cameras today, I actually demand this with every camera I have, that it is weather sealed. And the only exception I allow is on Leica M series cameras, but they are so robust, they don't need the attribute being weather sealed. And so it's not a distinction attribute to other cameras, but it's a must-have, and this camera has it. That was also the case for the Canon EOS R. And since the lens system is the same, you could claim this also for the predecessor of that camera. But here I think it looks as if they would have taken it even to the next level. Here is another feature I like a lot on the concept of these EOS R cameras. And that was in place also on the EOS R before and the EOS RA. And I think in general on the R lineup, but it's also here on the EOS R5. And people who know rangefinder cameras from Leica, so the M series cameras, they used to protect the sensor by closing the shutter when you switch it off. And that's very convenient, because if you switch lenses very often, then you will have the danger of getting some dust and dirt on the sensor. But if the shutter is closed, this cannot happen. And there's a menu entry here. It's on the 4th page of the configuration section, and it says shutter at shutdown. If I press that button here, I can switch between closed and open. If I go to open and switch the camera off, by the way, it reminds me nicely that we need to have some protection in form of a cap anyway on top of the mount here, then the sensor is not protected. And this is the standard way you have it on most DSLMs I'm aware of, except, as I said, Leica M series rangefinder cameras. But if I switch the camera on again and go back to that menu item and now choose closed, then I get the same warning when I switch it off. But see what happens here. The shutter is closed, and that's very good, and it really protects the sensor from being exposed to dirt and dust. You should never touch on that shutter, of course, so there is still no option to poke with your finger inside the camera here, but at least when you switch lenses, it will be protected. Another tiny little detail on concept and handling, and that's, I should say, probably in the next couple of minutes, accumulation of tiny little details. Standalone, they don't make a big difference, but altogether they really make your life easier, is how the lenses are mounted in the RF system. And if you have here your marker, you know that marker needs to be at 12 o'clock. And here's the marker on the camera mount, and on former versions in the Canon universe, but also with many other manufacturers, you have here or here a marker, and then you need to basically find the right way to mount this. This is super easy here. And by the way, also in the Hasselblad X1D system, where they have the same concept, you always know that your marker on the lens needs to sit at 12 o'clock. So if I have the camera in this way, and I found my marker here, which is here, so here's the marker. I know this has to be at 12 o'clock. I don't have to try around, and it immediately fits and sits firmly. And that's one of these tiny little details which I think Canon did absolutely right in the new R camera system with the RF lenses. Another one of these tiny little details is the top LCD you have here. So the top LCD is today's standard on many cameras. You have it on the Nikon C series, the C7 Mark II for instance. By the way, I will do a video on the Nikon C7 II in the next weeks. I did shoot with that camera, I love it. I in particular still love the Nikon Noct 0.95. But also the standard zoom and prime lenses for the system. So stay tuned and don't miss these videos. And you also have a top LCD, of course, on the Leica SL2 and various other cameras, but Canon is really leveraging that display to the max. And let's try to get the light on here for a moment. And now you have here a button, and with that button you can toggle now through all kinds of different settings, and you can use your control here to actually change these settings, which is very nice. So let's go to ISO for a moment. So here I can change my ISO now in a very convenient way. Let's go back to 800, which is suitable for that room. And I don't have just one set of information here. I can basically access most of my important menus by this button here and toggle them with the top control here, which is very nice. And I think makes more use of the top display than on many other cameras. What also many people will find convenient is that there are so many buttons here to use and customize. Clearly, I'm very often a Leica shooter, and people who follow me on my channel know this. I'm also a big fan of simplistic design. And here you clearly have maxed out your control elements if you look at that camera body. But for many professional shooters, this will be a big help because you have access via buttons to all kinds of functions that you might want to use. Another of these tiny little details which is convenient is the LCD screen. And you can tilt, flip, you can use it for, portraits, selfies, whatever you want. You have all kinds of options here. And clearly that's not the case for all cameras we have currently in the market. Some cameras have it, and here it's fully maxed out in terms of fungibility and versatility, and you can use this in various ways. Under the headline of concept, so mirrorless camera, fully weather sealed, very versatile, handling, build quality. I will pause here. As I said, there would be many more things to say, and I think this camera is feature rich and has been built very well, and people spend a lot of thought at Canon to get this in this particular design with all the controls and with all the functionality. My second reason why I think this camera is a game changer for Canon are its feature specs and most importantly image quality. And Canon built into this camera a totally new developed CMOS sensor with about 45 effective megapixels. It's steered by the Digic X image processor and is tuned for speed of operations across all features you have incorporated in that camera. And the ISO range is from 100 to 51,200. You can also go up to 102,400. And the image quality of that newly developed sensor is really, really good. What's also eye-catching here is if you go into the menu, and let's go back. By the way, if you want to just quickly change sections, you use that control wheel here on top, and then you toggle through the sections. And if you want to go into the details here in the menus, you can just do this via the control wheel here at the rear side or via the joystick. And by the way, that's another item I didn't mention under handling. I think I forgot that we have here now a joystick like we have on many other DSLMs. That's a real blessing, because on the former Canon EOS R we had this very weird touch control element here, which I never used and never made any sense to me. As mentioned previously in the video, this is one of the most feature-packed digital cameras on planet Earth. There is hardly any feature the camera world today is aware of and has to offer which is not incorporated in the Canon EOS R5. When you are not used to the menu from the Canon EOS R or some other R camera and you go into the menu system and structure for the first time, on the R5 you will be totally overwhelmed. And the menu structure is so rich, there are so many settings, so many tweaks, that it is overwhelming for people who are not used to it. And this camera is definitely nothing I would advise or recommend for entry-level photographers, because people will not even understand what all these menu entries actually mean. And again, in the same way as what I mentioned under my first reason why this is a terrific camera, namely concept, design and handling, it also applies under features. There are so many interesting settings you can tweak here. And I randomly pick one feature here as an example, which is shooting info display. If you go onto that, you have here at the bottom focus distance. So this lets appear a focusing distance scale on the display. And that is something we have on other cameras too. But here it's highly customizable. So you can say, I want to have this in manual focus only, which makes sense because if you're in manual focus, you might care more about the distance to your subject than in autofocus, where the camera is getting the job done for you. You can also say when focusing, you can also say always. So even in autofocus, I always want to get the focus distance scale on my display, or you can disable it. So the customization, and that's just one example I randomly picked here, on that camera menu is just fantastic. And as I said, it's the opposite of the simplistic design and concept we have on Leica cameras. And here you get the max of all features. And if we look into what the camera is delivering here, so going to page 1 of the camera menu, you have the usual image quality setting, but then you have dual pixel RAW, and you can look this up in the web what it means. I think Canon made a big thing out of it when they introduced it for the first time, but what it basically says is you can adjust in post-processing a little bit where the focus is sitting, and that's actually very convenient. It's memory intense, so you need to be sure that you need it in order to enable it. I have disabled it here, but it is a great feature and is, I think, unique to Canon. Then you have here all the typical settings, but if we go into the feature page here, number 5, we have multiple exposures. And by the way, I changed my lens here. So in the first part of the video, I had the 24 to 240 travel zoom on the EOS R5 because that was still on the camera body from a macro shooting with a NiSi close-up lens, and I'm going to post that video with a link below in the info box so you can look this up. And if I want to get multiple exposures, that's not possible with the 24 to 240 millimeter travel lens. I switched to the 24 to 105, which is the typical standard lens here, zoom lens on the Canon EOS R series. And you have multiple exposures here. You have HDR mode, you have focus bracketing, which is actually what I used on the travel zoom 24 to 240 to create nice macro close-up shots. And on the next page, you also have your interval timer. And by the way, you have an interval timer in the meaning of the word. You can shoot still images with the intervalometer, but you can also in the video menu, which I'm going to show later, go directly for time-lapse movies up to 8K, which is insane and has not been seen on many other cameras. And so you have here lots of features which you can use. And I think it is time to have a glimpse into image quality. Let's look into some samples, nothing special, but just look at the colors, the sharpness, and the overall image impression, and get your own idea what the image quality of that sensor is. What I also want to quickly mention is that you can take quite long exposures handhold. And the reason for that is that we have in-body image stabilization, like people know it from Sony, Nikon, Leica, Panasonic, many other camera brands. And in combination with the right lens, it gives you up to 8 stops. So you have quite some flex in not placing your camera on a tripod and shooting handhold. The images you just saw were taken with different lenses, and I think the last ones were taken on tele landscape photography with this one here. So that's the 100 to 500 Canon RF lens. Is a fantastic lens for sports and action photography, which brings me to my next topic and my third reason why this is a very good value proposition, and that's the autofocus system. From an autofocus perspective, the Canon EOS R5 is fantastic. We have in the specs about 5,940 autofocus positions, and the autofocus points and independence on what you choose in the customization of the camera will cover almost the whole area of the sensor. So this camera is excellent for focus tracking, action photography, sports photography. You will hardly miss the target in autofocus. And I should say, I used the autofocus intensely in my shootings and it never disappointed me. And also the frames per second which you can take in burst mode, they are just insane. And I think this is a true competitor to the Sony Alpha 9, Alpha 9 Mark II, and also to the newly announced Sony Alpha 1. And clearly you get here a fantastic camera for action and sports. Also worthwhile to mention is the autofocus working range. And in terms of LVs, this works from -6, which is probably dim moonlight, up to 20. So I never had a situation where the autofocus was not working. And I should also say, in the many images I took with that camera, the ones which were not sharp, where the focus was not sitting where it was supposed to sit, that's just a few outliers. So I think the autofocus is working well. Looking into the autofocus settings, I go here with the Q button, which is famous for Canon cameras for quite a while. And you have here all kinds of things to tweak. So if we go here down the menu, you see you can customize this along the vertical axis here. And then you can choose here all kinds of autofocus areas. You also have 1 point and spot, of course. And if you really want to go for focus tracking here, you actually need to go to servo. Let's get this here. So servo. And then later on the menu down here on drive mode, you can go to high speed, low speed, high speed plus, and so on. And if you want to test this for a moment, this is really quick. So it says, if we go to the menu here, and I think I can verify that, if you go to the shutter mode, and if on shutter mode you are mechanical or electronic first curtain, you actually can go up to 12 frames per second, which is quite a lot. If you go to electronic shutter, you can even go up to 20 frames per second, which is quite interesting. And if for a moment we go here to manual focus to not irritate the camera, because I have the lens cap on, and we are in manual mode here, so let's go here to our settings. I don't think that the aperture makes here any difference. Let's go here to, I don't know, 1/500 seconds, and then listen to that sound here, how it's working. You see how many frames I could take before this camera stopped buffering and needed a rest or break to pause for a moment? This is really suitable for super quick actions and sports, and in my opinion works quite well. In order to illustrate what I just said on autofocus speed and how precise the autofocus is, let me share a few images in continuous burst mode shut and get your own impressions about the autofocus system of the Canon EOS R5. Reason number 4 why the Canon EOS R5 is a fantastic camera are its video capabilities. And here I think Canon made the big marketing mistake. They advertised and focused a lot when it came to this camera on its 8K video capabilities. And very soon people found out that if you actually use it, it's overheating and the fun was gone. And I don't think that that camera should be advertised because of its video features only. It really is a true photographer's camera. And I mentioned the word before, for me this is the perfect hybrid camera because it has absolutely everything a photographer wishes for, but it also has amazing video features. And I'm going to very quickly touch on them, and then I show a few samples in particular on high frame rates because that is something I really enjoyed playing with that camera. So first of all, how do you get into the video system? If you are on the normal mode dial here, I'm here currently in manual mode, you push the mode button. And when you push the mode button, you push info, and then it changes here into the video section. So you are now in the video sections, and then in the menu you have all kinds of things to tweak, and there are so many things. By the way, here it's just coming up on page 8, overheat control. You can now disable this, which came with a later firmware update, and if you disable it, you actually can shoot longer in 8K before the camera loses it because of the temperature increasing to a level where it starts to harm the internal parts of the camera. And that is something which came later. But in general, I think if you want to go for a several minute video clip in 8K, that's absolutely no problem. And longer clips in 8K, by the way, they will also blow up your memory. I don't think that's meaningful anyway. And in most of the cases, people will later in post-processing convert 8K videos anyway down to 4K because that's what most devices are able to play. So let's scroll back in the sections to the first page here. And the first page in the movie settings starts with movie recording quality, and then we have movie recording size. And here now with the joystick you can navigate between resolution and then frames per second and compression mode and all of that. And here you see the 8K modes. We have 8KD here and 8KU. 8KU is the standard 8K mode. 8KD gives you more resolution on the horizontal axis. The same applies to 4KD and 4KU. Then you have full HD and so on, and you can tweak here your frame rates and what have you. It's really, really nice. What I enjoyed a lot here was high frame rate recording. And if I go down here and go into enable, you see here for the time being we are in 4KD at 50 frames per second. And now I'm switching here, and then it shows me the same resolution but 100 frames per second. And some of you might now ask and say, well, hang on for a second. The camera is advertised with 120 frames per second, or to be precise, 119.9 frames per second. And that's depending on the video system you have chosen here. I'm sitting in Europe. That camera is shipped for Europe and it's in the PAL system. If you go to NTSC, which you can do, by the way, here by again switching sections to the settings, then you get video system. If I switch here now from PAL to NTSC, you will see how that changes my frames per second on high frames. So let's go back here. You see again 4KD at 59.94 frames per second. Enable gives me the magical 119.9 frames per second. And I enjoyed shooting in that mode a lot. And I'm going to show you now a few sample clips, and then we go back into the video capabilities in general.
I think I like it. think I like you. Got nothing to lose. 'Cause I think I like you. Tell me if you like me too. How can you move the way you do? It's making me crazy, yeah. You're moving just like you own the room. Make it look easy. I wanna take you away to somewhere we can be by ourselves. I see you looking my way, so maybe it's not all in my head.
I hope you enjoyed these clips, and it's really a lot of fun playing with that camera in video mode. Besides that, there are many features which are not available somewhere else, and what also plays nicely, hand in hand of course, is the autofocus here. And since I showed already in, let's say, still image photography, that the autofocus is great in tracking people, objects, what have you, you also have here of course the full strength of the autofocus methodologies implemented in that camera, playing out all you can expect from a top-notch video camera. In the same way as image stabilization of course is great. So if you shoot with that camera in videography handhold, you will get quite nice footage, and the risk of shakes, vibrations, erratic movements is quite reduced by the image stabilization you have in that camera, in the same way as you can take long exposures in photography based on the stops you win with in-body image stabilization. And then again, something I like in particular is the time-lapse movie mode here. And we saw before that given there is an intervalometer in the camera, you can shoot a lot of still images, also with the electronic shutter, to basically spare your mechanical shutter, and then later compile them in post-processing into a time-lapse video. There is also in the movie section here a time-lapse movie functionality, and if we go into that and enable it, we have so many options here. But what really fascinated me is that you get 4K time lapses processed in the camera, but even more interesting, you get 8K time lapses, and that is something which is very interesting. Because if you do an 8K time-lapse and you then post-process this down into a 4K time-lapse video, you can actually use Final Cut Pro or Premiere Pro and use the crop function to crop into your footage, and in this way highlight certain details in the footage you produced in your time-lapse video. So that's all very nice. I will stop here on video capabilities, but I think by now you will agree with me that this is one of the most feature-packed cameras in the world. And clearly it's a hybrid camera, closing the loop on that thought and comment I provided at the beginning. This camera should never have been marketed as a main feature to be an 8K camera. It's a very professional tool for professional photographers, and it has also super professional video capabilities, and people should have highlighted at the beginning that this is the perfect hybrid camera, providing several instruments in one single tool. Reason number 5, and my final argument why this will clearly bring Canon back to the top of camera manufacturers, is the lens system. And the RF lens system has a decent number of lenses already available, and among them some very interesting prime lenses. So for instance here you have the RF lens 50mm, widest open aperture is an f1.2. This really is a perfect lens for street, portraits, all kinds of applications, and the bokeh is buttery smooth. It's a very, very nice lens. I liked a lot shooting with it. But you also have a very interesting standard zoom. So despite the 24-105 and of course also a 24-70 f2.8, which is available in the RF lens lineup, you also have this very interesting lens, which really is a huge lens if you compare it. Let's put them side by side for a moment. So this is a monster lens, and is something which is, I think, unique to the RF lens system. It's 28mm to 70mm, and it has a constant aperture of f2.0. So you have a very light intense and very fast lens at all focal lengths between 28 and 70mm, which is unique. And as I said before on the handling, the build quality of these lenses is beyond any doubt. It's really good. I used this lens a few weeks ago to shoot at a wedding, and the images were just terrific because you can keep your aperture open at all focal lengths to an f2.0. You can shoot under dim light conditions and it will always deliver. And given the excellent properties of that newly developed Canon sensor, you also get a very good noise behavior. And in combination, the EOS R5 with that, I still like to call it a monster lens, is just something unique which I have not seen before. In the same way as on the Canon EF lens system, which goes back for decades in the Canon world, you have also here on the more premium lenses this red ring. And this red ring stands for premium, and these lenses are called L lenses. And that is something where you have to spend significantly more money, but you also get the best Canon has to offer for you. But these red rings, they are not available on all lenses in the RF mount system. And for instance, here on the travel zoom, which I had mounted on the camera at the beginning of my review, 24 to 240 millimeters, so a 10 times travel zoom. Here you don't have a red ring, so it's not supposed to be as premium as these other lenses here, but it's nevertheless a very good lens. The build quality is as solid as on the other lenses. You have a very decent image quality, and for people who spend a lot of money on that camera body but want to have the most universal lens at the beginning without spending a fortune, this is a good alternative to go with. You have just one lens, one camera body, you go on travel, and you can have all kinds of different applications taken care of with that lens camera body combo. And then of course we have the adapter, which allows us to mount EF Canon lenses to the R mount cameras. And there is a standard adapter which is very often shipped in a bundle with the camera body, but there is this, I think, enhanced adapter where you also have here a control ring. And that is a very nice feature. You even hear the clicks here, because you can program in the menu system of the camera what this ring is doing for you and changing in terms of parameters. And with that adapter you have also access to all the more exotic lenses from the Canon EF universe. And just to mention two examples, this is an interesting lens which is not available from many camera brands. This is a macro photo lens, MPE, and 65mm focal length, widest open aperture 2.8, and it offers a 5 times magnification. It's, let's call it a super macro lens, where you clearly need to work with focus stacking, as I demonstrated in another video some time ago, and is a very special lens. But with that adapter you can mount it to your R system camera. And another example I want to mention are the tilt shift lenses from Canon. So here is a 17mm TSE lens, and also they work flawlessly on the Canon EOS R5 and on all Canon EOS R cameras with this adapter. And I think in this way you have a huge universe of lenses at access. I just checked a moment ago at Novoflex to mention one manufacturer of camera adapters, and I counted 16 different lens adapters, which enables you to actually mount 16 different lens types to this camera body here. So to conclude on my reason number 5, the versatility, fungibility and flexibility you get with the Canon EOS R5 is super high, and you have basically access to a large universe of lenses which you can use and shoot on that camera body. Of course, many of them, if you use adapters, will be in manual focus mode, but who cares about that? If you are Leica M rangefinder series shooter, you know that manual focus in many cases might even be the better choice. I will stop the video here and hope you liked my very short, given what features we have in that camera, review of the Canon EOS R5. Clearly I could not cover all the aspects, but I tried to provide a broad spectrum of impressions and also of samples, what you can do with that camera and what it is offering to photographers and videographers. Remember, that's a hybrid camera here. And my conclusion clearly is that this is, in my own personal humble opinion, currently the best Canon has to offer. And given on what I just shared, it has the potential to bring back Canon to the very top of camera manufacturers. And if you think back some years, Canon and Nikon were always competing for market leadership, and they also had market leadership, exchanging probably between the two brands from time to time over many years. But then they were overwhelmed by all these DSLM system cameras without a mirror coming from, you know, Sony, Panasonic, later then Leica joined the game, and so on. And I think they did fall back in the rankings of camera manufacturer. With this camera, the Canon EOS R5, they have the potential at the Canon side to come back in the same way as Nikon, I think, with the Nikon C7 and the C7 Mark II and the C6 did so many things right. And as I said, there is a video coming on the Nikon C7 Mark II where I will share my thoughts about that fantastic camera. If you liked my review, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching and peace out.